Every 3 minutes, a John Deere tractor rolls off a final assembly line. Green paint, yellow wheels, the leaping deer on the hood. The line is 380 meters long, and it takes about 4.5 hours to build one machine out of roughly 30,000 parts. That factory is not in Iowa. It is in Mannheim, Germany, and it is the largest John Deere plant anywhere outside of North America. Around 40,000 tractors a year come out of that building. For years, the larger 6 Series machines sold into the American market were built in Waterloo, Iowa. That arrangement ended. Mannheim now builds every 6R model for global sale, which includes the one sitting on your dealer's lot with an American price tag on the window. Here is the first thing you should know about that plant, and it is not in any brochure I have ever been handed. The tractors assembled at Mannheim run engines built in Saran, France. The cabs come from Bruxelles, about 30 miles south of the assembly line. So the mid-range John Deere your dealer sells you as the American workhorse is a German-assembled machine with a French engine and a German cab. That is not a rumor from a forum. That is the supply chain. Let me say one thing, and then I will not bring it up again. I put 11 years behind a dealer parts counter into a manual called the Equipment Freedom Manual. It is at getacreon.com, linked in the description and the pinned comment. If you want it, it is there. That is all. I want to be precise about what I am claiming, because this is the kind of subject where people get sloppy and then get corrected in the comments by somebody who worked at the plant. John Deere still builds heavy iron in Iowa. The 7R, the 8R, and the articulated 9R series come out of Waterloo. Compact and utility tractors come out of Augusta, Georgia. Lawn and garden equipment comes out of Greenville, Tennessee, and Horicon, Wisconsin. Deere has not walked away from American manufacturing. What moved is the middle. The 6R range, roughly 90 to 250 horsepower, is the segment that covers most working farms in this country. That is the tractor doing chores, running a loader, pulling a grain cart, handling everything that is not the big spring and fall passes. That range is the volume of American agriculture, and it is assembled in Germany. Mannheim runs up to 147 mid-sized tractors a day across the 6M and 6R lines. Every one of them pre-ordered by the person who will end up owning it. I want to give you a sense of the place because most American farmers picture a satellite operation, and that is not what this is. Before the pandemic, roughly 20,000 visitors a year came through that plant and the cab factory at Bruxelles. The company keeps 11 factory guides on staff covering 7 languages. That is not a subcontractor assembling somebody else's design. That is a flagship, run like a flagship, and it happens to sit in southwest Germany rather than eastern Iowa. Now hold that next to what you get told on a lot in Nebraska. The brochure talks about Moline. The advertising talks about American families and American fields and 2 centuries of American farming. Nothing in that material is false. It is just aimed somewhere other than the assembly line where your specific machine was actually put together. And here is the part that reframes the whole conversation this industry has been having for the last 2 years. John Deere did not build its way into Germany. It bought its way in. In 1956, Deere & Company purchased Heinrich Lanz AG of Mannheim. Lanz was not some struggling shop looking for a rescue. Lanz built the Bulldog, introduced in 1921, one of the most successful tractors Europe ever produced. It was a German engineering house with a serious reputation and a factory to match. Deere wanted into European manufacturing. Rather than build a plant and learn the market from zero, it bought the German company that already knew how. That acquisition was Deere's first manufacturing expansion outside of North America. Think about what that actually means. The engineering culture, the tooling, the supplier relationships, the workforce that knew how to build a tractor for European conditions, none of that came from Illinois. It was already there, and Deere paid to own it rather than compete with it. That is a legitimate strategy. Half the industrial history of the last century is companies buying the expertise they could not build fast enough. But it is a very different story from the one this brand tells about itself. 70 years later, that same site in Mannheim builds every 6R that ships anywhere in the world, including the one on your lot in Iowa or Nebraska or Kansas. So when the industry argues about whether German engineering is beating American engineering in tractors, there is a detail sitting underneath the argument that almost nobody says out loud. For the mid-range machines, John Deere's answer to German engineering is German engineering. Deere bought the factory, kept the workforce, kept the engineering base, and painted the product green. That is not a scandal. It is a business decision, and by most measures, it was a smart one. What bothers me is that nobody tells the farmer. You buy a machine wrapped in 200 years of Moline, Illinois heritage, sold to you with imagery of American fields and American families, and the assembly line is in southwest Germany. Subscribe if you believe a farmer ought to be told where his machine was actually built. Here is why it matters beyond the trivia, and it comes down to two things. The first is parts. When a component on a Mannheim-built machine fails during harvest, the part behind that part number has a supply chain that runs through Europe. Most of the time you never notice because the regional warehouse has it. When you do notice, you notice hard, and the answer you get at the counter is that it is on order. That is not your dealer being difficult. That is geography, and nobody explained the geography to you when you signed. The second is the pricing argument. For years, the industry has told American farmers that European machines cost more because they are imported, because of freight, because of tariffs, because of exchange rates. Fine. Then explain why a German-built John Deere 6R and a German-built competitor sitting on the next lot over face the same ocean, the same freight, and the same exchange rate, and get sold under completely different stories. There is a version of this in every mature American industry. Boeing kept the name and the heritage and moved the decisions further and further from the people who actually built the airplanes. Harley-Davidson sold American identity while the supply chain quietly went global. The badge stays. The story stays. What sits behind the badge changes, and the customer is the last one told. Now the honest part, and there are several things here that cut against my own headline. Global manufacturing is normal. Fendt builds in Marktoberdorf, Claas builds in Harsewinkel, and has invested heavily in Omaha, Nebraska. Case International Harvester and New Holland sit under a corporate structure with deep European roots. Almost nothing in this industry is built entirely in one country, and holding Deere to a standard nobody else meets would be dishonest. Second, a German-built John Deere is not a worse tractor. By most accounts, Mannheim is a well-run plant with quality systems matched to Waterloo. Plenty of operators would tell you the 6R is the best mid-range machine Deere makes. I am not arguing the machine is bad. I am arguing the story around it is incomplete. Third, and I want to be careful here, the shift of 6R production away from Waterloo was reported by the trade press as a consolidation of global build. I have not seen Deere frame it as a move away from American labor, and I am not going to put that motive in their mouth without a document. What I am comfortable saying is this. American farmers built John Deere's reputation with their own money over 2 centuries on the assumption that the green machine was the American machine. For the horsepower range most working farms actually run, that has quietly stopped being true, and the change was never announced to the people paying for it. You were not lied to. You were just never told. In this business, those two things feel about the same by the time you find out. Subscribe if you stand with the operators who would rather know exactly what they bought.